Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 13th of April 2023. I do apologise for being late today. Goodness, I was up till 1:30 last night trying to get book submissions in, deadlines. I had a live interview after I'd done a 7-hour shift working till 9 o'clock at night, and oh my goodness. So yeah, it was all happening at once. But anyway, I'm here and that's what counts. So let's go to our opening gambit, which is the Ukrainian official figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats, propaganda, somewhat inaccurate, arguably, particularly on the headline numbers. I find these indicatively useful. They give me a sense of the trend, and particularly with the numbers of equipment in certain categories I find very interesting. Yesterday, 540 liquidated personnel were lost, Russian troops. That's there or thereabouts for what it has been. It dipped back down from the previous day where it's up a little bit more in the 700s. Got 10 APCs, 0 tanks. 10 APCs is quite a heavy loss of APCs, although, you know, if you look at 7,053 being lost over the war, then, you know, that per day, that average is somewhere around 15 to 20, so a day. So, you know, 10 is significant, but actually it's lower than the average. It's whether that headline figure there is, you know, that total figure is accurate. 7 artillery systems, and I've been talking about how there's an explicit targeting of those systems and pieces ahead of the counteroffensive, but also because they kill the most people. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 5 drones, 7 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. And I've been talking about how special equipment has been explicitly targeted, or at least it seems so to me, as part of suppression of enemy air defense maneuvers, possibly, or activity. Is that ahead of the counteroffensive? Is that something generally they want to be doing? I think it's an important thing to do, and there is something to say about that. I'm going to just show a piece of video footage to look into that idea, that they are explicitly aiming for those. So 82% of the wounded and sick members of the Ukrainian Defense Forces are returned to duty after treatment, says the president of the National Academy of Medical Sciences. That would be dependent upon what the average return to duty after treatment is. Like, how long is treatment? Is that 82% returned after a year, after 6 months, after 4 months? You know, what is the time frame? I guess that will be in total since the beginning of the war. So that's now a year and a bit, a year and a month, or whatever. And that's how that figure is going to be calculated, I would have thought. But yeah, that percentage will change depending on how many months you're talking about. Okay, British intelligence asks a question: is there another reason why the Russians are cancelling the victory parade? So they had these victory parades, 9th of May holiday. Leaders of several regions bordering Ukraine, as well as occupied Crimea, have announced that their usually high-profile 9th of May Victory Day military parades will be cancelled. Some Russian cities further away from Ukraine, have confirmed they plan to go ahead with Victory Day. The cancelled events have likely primarily been called off because of security concerns near the border, as officials have claimed. However, the different approaches highlight a sensitive communications challenge for the Kremlin. Putin couches the special military operation in the spirit of the Soviet experience in World War II. The message risks sitting increasingly uneasily with the many Russians who have immediate insights into the mismanaged and failing campaign in Ukraine. Honouring the fallen of previous generations could easily blur into exposing the scope of the recent losses which the Kremlin attempts to cover up. There are also other things going on, which is, do they have enough equipment to put on show in some of these parades, and troops? Are they sending them all to the front line? I've seen footage of certain pieces of equipment that have been painted in certain ways that appear to be sort of more paradey type equipment being blown up on the front lines. Well, that's interesting. So you know, there's lots that can be said about why they are cancelling these parades. Okay, this is a piece of electronic warfare equipment. Russia is increasingly losing their EW units. So when I talk about, it seems that there's an explicit targeting of if we go down here to pieces of special equipment, these are often electronic warfare or radar installations. This R330ZH Jitel was located deep in Russian-occupied parts of Donetsk Oblast. A single HIMARS missile releasing a tungsten ball rain eliminated that Russian position. It's fascinating that they would use a HIMARS missile on this. This is the HIMARS that is almost like airburst. It explodes, releasing tungsten ball bearings or bits of, tungsten ball bearings, and they shred stuff. I showed you months and months ago a picture of a supply truck that had been absolutely ravaged by these tungsten ball bearings. And that is a piece of electronic warfare or an installation there that's been hit by HIMARS, which is, you'd expect HIMARS to be hitting, troop accumulations or ammunition depots. And now it seems that they are, as the Russians have adapted and are placing things 100 kilometers back and so on and so forth, that HIMARS are being used to hit a greater variety of targets. But I think this kind of target is a high value target. And I think that's a really good use of a single HIMARS rocket or missile. So Russian tank spotted in the USA, Louisiana, namely the T-90A, which the Ukrainian military captured last year in the Kharkiv region. Now it looks like the Russian tank was handed over to the Americans for research. This has happened the other way. So we know that missiles have been sent, manpads and other piece of equipment to be sent to Iran that have been captured by the Russians from the Ukrainians using them. This, NATO equipment, they've been sent to Iran or kept by the Russians themselves. Well, here's an example of a Russian tank, a T-90A tank, one of their more modern tanks, being taken to America so that they can have a look at the stuff on board. Right. Here is, and this is not the first time this kind of thing has happened very publicly. The Russians are claiming that they have taken out a piece of equipment that is arguably not even on the front line. So this guy is saying that he and his comrades have destroyed 4 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. As far as I know, those are not yet on the front line. They are behind the lines or still in Germany and Poland, involved in training in the combined arms maneuvers that's going on in Grafenwöhr and other places around. So I think this is complete nonsense and probably a bit of psyops. I doubt it's true, but there is a non-zero chance that it could be true that the Bradleys have in fact found their way to the front line. I'm pretty sure that had they been destroyed, you would get some footage of them being destroyed by the Russians, because that would be a huge PR win. There is money involved, I think, if Russian troops take out some of these big pieces of NATO equipment. Certainly the tanks, they've been offered money for being responsible for taking those tanks out. According to the Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Russian Federation, a fire broke out in the building of a farmer's market in Khimki near Moscow tonight. Another big fire, another Russia on fire incident. Again, is it directly linked to the war? Is it partisan activity? Is it insurance job? Is it just, so on and so forth? These are happening so often that there is something going on, and they are widespread, and they affect a lot of different types of building, organization, business, so on and so forth. Okay, last night the Russians hit, so the Russians are still doing their stuff. They're still using S-300, which are surface-to-air missiles, supposed to be used to take out fast-moving jets and whatnot, but actually these can be used in a secondary mode to take out ground targets in a ground-to-ground mode, but that mode means that these missiles are far less accurate, so their circle error probable is in terms of hundreds and hundreds of meters, and so that means that only 50% of the missiles have to hit within, say, 300-meter radius, and that means that 50% can go pretty much anywhere, and it's still a precision weapon. But anyway, I'd have to look exactly what the CEP is for the S-300s when they're used in the ground-to-ground mode, but it's no surprise that very often the Ukrainians are claiming that they're hitting residential buildings and show evidence of that taking place. But on the other hand, the Ukrainians will also be always trying to claim that the Russians are hitting residential buildings and not military targets. So there are two sides to these kind of claims with any kind of strike. And it's the same with the Russians. The Russians are always claiming, you look at Rebar's summaries for the day and summaries of the strikes, they always claim that the Ukrainians are using HIMARS and are taking out hospitals and residential buildings and this and that, and never admitting really to military targets being hit. Well, it's the same for both sides. So, always take that with a pinch of salt. Right, moving on to odds and sods. There's going to be a lot more talk today, and there will be for days about these leaks. So the leaks are, plumb in the middle of a lot of analysts, analysis. Shashank Joshi here for The Economist, the defense correspondent, say this is quite a claim. A significant proportion of the content of these leaked reports is untrue, manipulated, or both, and that's a UK defense official. So that's saying, okay, you've got a whole bunch of leaked stuff getting out here. A significant proportion, is that 20%, 30%, 40%, 60%, 90%? I don't know. You could interpret a significant proportion as anywhere along that range, but at least some of it is untrue, manipulated, so photoshopped or whatever, or both. And that's according to the UK intelligence services there, or at least someone in the UK intelligence services. Phillips O'Brien saying, I haven't said much about the intelligence leaks because I'm no intelligence expert, and there are lots of people out there who know more than I do. However, I can't see how it make the slightest difference in the outcome of this year's fighting. So he's saying actually it won't make that much difference. But we have heard that the Ukrainians had supposedly changed some of their tactics, or changed some of their plans, for the upcoming counteroffensive. Now, Alexei Reznikov, the defense minister, said intelligence leak contains a mix of true and false information. So he acknowledged yesterday that the US intelligence leaks contains that range. However, the true information is already outdated, he said. Of course, he's going to be trying to sell this as not being as much of a problem as some are claiming. Now, out of these leaks, there's so many different areas that leaks pertain to. Here's one concerning the UK intelligence provision, certainly British aircraft. So Russian pilot, says Rob Lee, had misinterpreted what a radar operator, he's actually quoting from the New York Times, the Russian pilot had misinterpreted what a radar operator on the ground was saying to him and thought he had permission to fire. The pilot who had locked onto the British aircraft fired, but the missile did not launch properly. And this is the, I think it was a Rivet UK British intelligence surveillance aircraft is what I'm looking for, it says it there, was fired upon some months ago, and this was a really dodgy moment. In fact, Ben Wallace, the defense secretary, had to make an announcement in Parliament. He talked about this, said that it was basically Russian ineptitude and malfunctioning and pilot mistake, and the leaks talk to this. So Russian jet fired a missile at a manned British surveillance aircraft flying over the Black Sea in September, but the munition malfunctioned, according to US defense officials, and a recently leaked classified US intelligence report. The incident was far more serious than originally portrayed and could have amounted to an act of war. According to two US defense officials, the Russian pilot had misinterpreted what a radar operator on the ground was saying to him and thought he had permission to fire. The pilot who had locked onto British aircraft fired, but the missile did not launch properly. So had that have happened, you would have had a significant surveillance aircraft being taken out of the sky probably, and that even if it had been a mistake by the pilot, who knows what might have happened. You could have had NATO involved in the war. On the back of that. Now, the biggest bit of news probably of today is the news that these leaks, the Discord leaks, have come from, or at least most of them, I'm not 100% sure, from a man kind of in charge of a group on Discord. So he's a young gun lover who worked at a military base and shared classified info on with a small group of men and boys searching for companionship amid the pandemic. So here's a guy that was going to work in a military base, had access to some of these documents, ended up taking pictures of them. He first started trying to transcribe what he'd seen or summarize what he'd seen, and then people didn't find that interesting enough, so he then started taking pictures. And this guy was a conspiracy theorist, a racist, gun lover. They used to get together and pray and stuff in this group. It was a real interesting mix of demographics and beliefs, worldviews, and whatnot. Anyway, the Washington Post has written an article on this. They've interviewed a teenage boy who had met this chap OG 4 years ago, idolized him. The boy said OG claimed he spent at least some of his day inside a secure facility that prohibited cell phones. He toiled for hours summarizing the classified info he saw at work for the group. The Discord server that formed around OG echoes a story that's become familiar since 2020. Young men and teenage gamers in lockdown turning increasingly to private chat groups. The boy in the server with OG, who the Post is not naming, shared around 300 photos of classified documents with the Post, most of which hasn't been published. He argued that the public deserves to know how intelligence agencies spend their tax dollars. Well, not really. If that happens, then they wouldn't really be doing the work of intelligence, which is clandestine. So that's a really poor rationale, in my opinion. The Post listened to audio of a man and the boy identified as OG and viewed a video of him at a shooting range in which he yells a series of racial and anti-Semitic slurs into the camera, then fires several rounds at the target. The small server of about 24 men and boys emerged out of a large server of fans of Oxide, a YouTuber who told the Post earlier today that he is in his 20s and serves in the army in the Pacific Northwest. OG became the leader and enforced a pecking order. Last year, OG got upset that the server didn't seem interested in his write-ups of the classified info he saw at work, so he began to post images of the documents themselves, printed off several times a week. The boy and another young member of the server insisted that OG wasn't working at any country's behest. OG did seem to have a dark view of the US government, once insisting on a baseless conspiracy that the government knew about the May 2022 Buffalo shooting in advance, even though so the Buffalo shooting is one where white supremacists intended to go on a shooting rampage in Buffalo's supermarket in May 2020 and killed 10 people, all of them black, and wounded 3 more. Even though OG might not have been anyone's agent, about half the members of the server were located overseas, including in Russia and Ukraine. The 2 young members of the server told the Post. OG is not a whistleblower, the boy told the Post. In recent days, even as the FBI hunted for him, he started a new server to keep talking to his small group of online friends. He told them to delete any classified documents that they had. The boy said he hasn't been contacted by federal law enforcement and promised not to divulge OG's real name. You can bet they're onto him now, that's for sure. That is fascinating. And now, how much of that is true, we will find out in the coming days, I'm sure. The FBI will, and CIA and God knows who else will be onto this. You can be certain of that. If that is the provenance of these leaked documents, I mean, just wow, it's probably not what anyone was expecting, which is some random conspiracy theorist dude taking pictures of these and printing them off and then sharing them online, having weird views of the US government, of X, Y, and Z. Now, the other hand, is that a perfect story that to act as psyops, given out by the US government? I don't know. Like, I'm sure you could be your own conspiracy theorist here. I would suggest following the data, not speculating too much here. I guess just hang on, wait to see what happens over the next few days. But that is what the Washington Post are reporting. Now, going on to talk about we've got 2 beheading videos. We've got the videos of at least two people beheaded next to an M113 APC that hit a mine. That happened recently. The snow and everything indicate, or the weather indicate that was very recent. I think their hands and their heads were chopped off, and that appears to be, I think, Wagner probably as well. and then the one of the person having his head chopped off by a knife as he was alive and shouting and screaming. I mean, goodness, I asked what pro-Russian voices would think about this, and some of them on my threads are like unbelievable. It's just like, oh yeah, this happens in war, or you guys do it as well type things. No, 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 that hasn't happened, actually. That hasn't happened. And it's also not to the same degree either. So if you do argue that Ukrainians are committing war crimes, let's count them up. Let's count up the 75,000 that have been counted so far for the Russians against how many of the Ukrainians. And have they been going around beheading people? No, no. So it's not both sidesism. Whataboutism. That's not good enough. And, you know, some of them saying, oh, how do you know it's not a psyops? The guy screaming for his life, getting like, oh, so those are Ukrainian soldiers doing that to a Russian, and it's just cosplay or something. No, it's just all of that's kind of pathetic. Anyway, it turns out that the Wagner mercenary who has, I presume, the guy that's escaped from, is this guy that escaped to Norway? I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, former Wagner mercenary identifies his former colleagues in the beheading video. And yeah, so that is potentially being found out by his voice, by the voices, and so on and so forth. So that is now coming out at the moment. Is there anything else on that? I'm sure I've got a picture of the guy somewhere. Let's just have a quick look into that. Anyway, going into the Medusa piece, it is a guy that escaped through Norway, an escaped Wagner Group fighter now seeking asylum in Norway. According to the former mercenary, the people performing the beheading in the video are unmistakably Wagner Group combatants. Osechkin says Medvedev definitely recognizes, so this is a human rights activist who has been working with Medvedev, the escaped Wagner soldier, definitely recognizes his colleagues, Wagner Group troops, based on their nicknames, the way they talk, and their manner when talking over the radio. So the claim is that, yeah, this is bona fide Wagner atrocities. Okay, going on to just another bits of kind of random bit of news. I'm not quite sure how to categorize this, but anyway, Russian seas. I showed you a picture of some deer that were endangered species in the Red Book, which is a book of endangered species, as people reminded me in the thread. Russians seized 20 nature reserves in Ukraine and then turned them into hunting grounds, according to the president's office. Ukrinform reports, citing Andriy Yermak, the head of the Ukrainian president's office, quote, Russians have already occupied 20 nature reserves in Ukraine. They are turning parks where rare species of animals and plants are supposed to be protected into hunting grounds, mines, and parking lots for tanks. The survival of wildlife is another important reason why Ukrainian land should be freed as soon as possible, Yermak said. As reported, according to preliminary information, since beginning the full-scale invasion, Russia has caused almost $2 trillion actually $54 billion, it's easier to say, in damage to Ukraine's environment. Okay, moving on to military aid, humanitarian aid, and other similar bits and pieces. Spain intends to deliver 6 Leopard 2A4s by the end of April to Ukraine. In addition to the main battle tanks, Spain will also send 20 APCs. Some thinking that these 20 APCs are the M113s that I think they were announced some months ago and possibly delivered some months ago already. So those APCs might have already gone, but the Leopards, 6 Leopards, will be there by the end of this month, so in the next couple of weeks. The New York Times reports that Polish Prime Minister says that Ukraine needs South Korean artillery shells. Polish Prime Minister said he believes that only the direct intervention of President Biden would lead to an agreement for South Korea to make its artillery shells available for Ukraine. In the interview, he said that Russia has far more artillery shells and is firing far more rounds on the battlefield each month than the Ukrainian army. I mean, that's been the case since the beginning of the war. I think both sides have got a shell hunger that has taken the total shells that they're firing on a daily basis right down, but they're both going down. And so where the Ukrainians were, or the Russians were firing 3 times as many at the beginning of the war, they're firing 3 times as many now. It's just both sides are firing less or fewer rounds. So he said that South Korea has a huge supply of artillery shells and could help, and this is absolutely true. And I wouldn't disagree with anything you said. Then it'd be interesting if the US does try and get involved with forcing South Korea, forcing a hand to come into the aid, being more uh, explicitly allied with Ukraine. They will have export rules in place such that they can't their the, their munitions and ordnance and equipment can't be re-exported to a warring nation or whatever the fine print is. We have seen Polish crabs, which are based on the South Korean chassis, I believe. The self-propelled howitzers. They have been a whole heap of those have been given to Ukraine. So there is some kind of wriggle room, perhaps. It would be great if South Korea could be brought to bear in this war in supporting Ukraine more explicitly. The World Bank has provided $200 million in aid to restore Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The World Bank will provide Ukraine with an additional $200 million in aid to restore its energy infrastructure, says the Prime Minister. Tataragami says here, just worth mentioning, a thread about a new private military company in the Bakhmut area. So we have Wagner. This is the claim that there's a new one being sent to the area. To improve the situation in the vicinity of Bakhmut, the enemy has introduced another private military company and is currently training a substantial number of new mercenaries. This mercenary group is actively engaged in a variety of activities, including assaults, reconnaissance, ambushes, and sabotage, and is working in close coordination with assembled assault detachments and small specialized units. It is noteworthy that several hundred of these newly trained mercenaries are expected to be deployed in the near future. Despite my inability to disclose further details at this time, it is highly probable that their existence will soon become publicly known. So he's kind of claiming that he knows stuff, but he can't kind of put the information out there yet. But there is another PMC being brought to the front. Now, we know that Shoigu's got a PMC that he's the defense minister for Russia. He had a PMC that was operating around Vuhledar, but they never got to. The idea was that the Russian conventional forces would do most of the legwork around Vuhledar, destroy it, capture it, and whatnot, and then Shoigu's PMC would go and stick the flag on top and say, "Look what we've done," and that would be a way of Shoigu saying, "Hey, my PMC is better than yours, Prigozhin," in this fight between Prigozhin and the Russian MOD. But that never actually happened because the Russians abjectly failed in Vuhledar. So perhaps there's that PMC that's being moved up to Bakhmut. I don't know, but then you would have a real tension between those two PMCs, I would have thought. Now, talking about Wagner mercenaries, they are apparently recruiting children in school. Here's occupied Mariupol in southern Ukraine. They're going and training school kids, how to be a really good mercenary. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that, that's for sure. And military aid, here we've got evidence that the Russians are using Iranian equipment, in this case helmets, Iranian-made body armor and helmet of the Russian army. Helmets look like they're a copy of the German Super 826 helmet, for those who know their helmets. Just another indication that Russia are being aided militarily by Iran. There's that close relationship that has been developing over the last year. Right. Now, I talked enough about Trump yesterday, so I don't really want to bang on about this, but it's really difficult when he is all over Russian propaganda networks. So, as Julia Davis says, meanwhile in Russia, state TV propagandists on every channel aired multiple clips of Trump's interview with Tucker Carlson. Their main takeaway, quote, Donald said that America is tired of fighting Russia and should surrender. So really interesting. Another one saying, apparently Donald, this is the quote from the propagandist, Donald proposed for America to surrender. According to Trump, Moscow has already won in the economic war. And which is a bit of a problem because this is, fuel for the propagandist fire. So that Tucker Carlson Trump interview is being really exploited by Russian TV propagandists. Anyway, I've said enough about that. You can go and see. I mean, there are so many clips going around about that. Right, talking about Hungary again. US is concerned about Budapest's desire for closer relations with Russia, says the ambassador there, US ambassador. We are concerned that Hungarian leaders seek closer ties with Russia despite its brutal aggression. Close economic cooperation with Russia fuels the Russian war machine and threatens the security of the transatlantic alliance, said US Ambassador to Hungary David Pressman. Of course, money and ideology trump morality so often. Such is the way of human action and activities. It's sad. Morality often plays second fiddle. Um, in the Republic of South Africa, the warrant for the arrest of Putin on the eve of the BRICS summit was called a stick in the wheel. So there's a spanner in the works of the BRICS agreement and meeting. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They're all going to get together to produce their alternative to the US hegemony, which is US being the supreme power and everything kind of operating around them. Well, China and Russia particularly want to create an alternative for that. They have a meeting in South Africa. The problem is Putin has an arrest warrant on his head by the ICC. South Africa, part of the ICC, they're signed up to the Rome Statute. So technically, if Putin goes to South Africa for a BRICS meeting, he should be arrested by the South Africans. And of course, the South Africans are like, dang, we don't want that to happen because actually we want to be part. It appears that they seem to still want to be a part of this axis of evil. No, this group of countries who are wanting China and Russia and themselves to be at the center of world geopolitical machinations. It's reported by The Guardian with reference to the statement of the Speaker, the President of South Africa, Vincent Magwen. This dictates the need for further agreements on how to manage this, and these agreements are already underway. So they're having conversations, trying to work out exactly what to do in order, I guess, probably to appease Putin and to appease Russia and to appease BRICS, rather than doing what is morally right. Again, geopolitical practicalities trump morality. Here's a war crime. Here's a potential war criminal that is a suspected war criminal that needs to go up in court. We're gonna house him. It's like he's a suspected murderer. Oh yeah, come into my house. I won't tell the police. I won't let the police come round. But come in. We'll have a chat because I know you're a mate of mine, but I know you're also suspected of, and there's loads of evidence that you are in fact a murderer. But come into my house. It's all right. Have a cup of tea. I won't tell the police. Yeah. So there's a bit of a moral dilemma going on there. A hardy perennial. So Shashank Joshi here talking about, again, this is coming out from the leaks, but it has a geopolitical dimension here. So Antonio Guterres, of the UN, Secretary General, indeed. The US believes, as learnt by the leaks, that he is too willing to accommodate Russian interests, according to fresh revelations in classified documents leaked online. The files suggest Washington has been closely monitoring Antonio Guterres. Wow. Another document from mid-February describes a frank conversation between Mr. Guterres and his deputy, Amina Mohammed. Guterres expresses, quote, dismay at a call from Ursula von der Leyen for Europe to produce more weapons and ammunition. Why would that cause dismay to Guterres? So there has been calls that the UN has not been strong enough on the war. It's really difficult because Russia sit on the Security Council. Lots of people saying the UN just has no teeth. It's not fit for purpose. A lot of criticism going that way. Something needs to change, right? You can't have a war criminal, his country sitting on the Security Council as a permanent member. It's just, Russia's invaded another country. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, yeah, there is that. Bloomberg has reported that Putin personally approved the arrest of American journalist Ivan Gershkovich. So this is a Wall Street Journal journalist who was arrested and is being accused of spying, essentially, of espionage. It apparently is completely not true. And this appears to be a way with which Russia can get leverage. They've basically kidnapped someone and will want to release him in exchange for something or someone, some concession from the US. And it's playing dirty. It really is playing dirty, but you can probably assume that Russia will come out better because they're being morally evil. Like the US, I would assume, aren't going to be likely to do something so overtly wrong as this, which is arresting someone on dubious charges. Some of you will find examples where the US have done that in the past, of course. But here we've got, it appears, a very obvious way of Putin manipulating himself into a position of getting leverage over the US, because he is willing to go there, whereas the US are less willing to go there. I would conclude. Swiss banks have begun to warn Russian clients about closing their accounts if they pay taxes to the Russian budget. Switzerland has faced pressure from the US and G7 countries, group of seven most powerful countries in the world, due to the small amount of frozen Russian assets. They've been not really doing enough. Many people are arguing there's so much Russian money in Switzerland. They need to be doing more to freeze those assets and to hold Russia to account for their actions, but that's not really happening. So after pressure, the Swiss banks have begun to warn Russian clients about closing their accounts. So hopefully that will have some meaningful outcome there for Russian money. Anyway, that's today's news. Hope that's of use. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for being part of this. Please check out my Frontline update to be coming soon, and hopefully my extra video later. It's going to be a very busy day. I hopefully will get all 3 videos out. Anyway, toodle pips.